All right, we're diving into something that's causing a bit of a stir lately. Potential changes at the FCC.
Oh, yeah.
The Federal Communications Commission. Now, you might be thinking, the FCC, what's that got to do with my life?
Right.
But honestly, it's way more influential than you might think, especially when we're talking about the internet. I mean, think about it. The speed of your connection, what you can even see online, the FCC kind of sets the rules of the road for all that digital stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
And with the Trump administration, they've been all about deregulation.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be seeing some big changes on the horizon that'll affect how we connect, communicate, how we even get our news and entertainment online.
Absolutely.
So to break it all down for us, we've got an expert here today.
It's great to be here. The FCC is definitely at a turning point. I think the decisions made over the next few months, they could have some pretty long-lasting effects on the internet as we know it.
So let's start with the possible new FCC chair, Brendan Carr.
Mm-hmm.
He's known for being pretty conservative, and he's got a lot of experience at the FCC already, even served as general counsel.
Right.
So he knows how the system works.
He does.
But what does this appointment mean, along with the Trump administration's whole push for deregulation? What's it all pointing to for the FCC's future?
Well, one area where we might see things shift pretty dramatically is net neutrality. I know it can sound kind of complicated.
It is a complex topic.
But the basic idea is that all internet traffic should be treated equally.
Right. Like, it shouldn't matter what website you're going to or what you're doing.
Exactly. It shouldn't matter where it's coming from, what the content is, where it's going. Carr's been opposed to the current net neutrality rules, the ones based on Title II classification of broadband.
Yeah, can you remind us what that classification does?
Basically, it gives the FCC more power to keep internet providers in check, to make sure they're not favoring some websites or services over others.
So if those regulations go away, what happens then? Like, what could that actually mean for someone who's, just browsing the web or trying to watch their favorite shows online?
That's the big question, isn't it? Without those net neutrality protections, internet providers could start making fast lanes, basically giving priority to certain websites and services, while others get stuck in the slow lane. They could even block or throttle access to content they don't like. You could end up with some websites taking forever to load. You might have to pay more to access certain streaming services, or you might even find that some types of content are just completely off limits.
That doesn't sound good. I mean, the internet's such a huge part of our lives now.
For sure.
For work, education, keeping in touch with people. If we don't have equal access, if it's all controlled by the providers, that could really limit what the internet can do.
Absolutely. And that's why this whole net neutrality thing has been such a battle.
Yeah, it's a hot topic.
The people who support it, they say it's crucial for keeping the internet open and innovative. But then you have opponents, like Carr, who think all these regulations are just stifling investment and holding back progress.
Sounds like we're heading for a real showdown on net neutrality then. But that's not the only area where Carr's views and this push for deregulation could make a difference. Let's talk about 5G.
Okay.
Everyone's buzzing about it around this next generation of wireless tech, how it's going to change everything. But I understand Carr's got some strong opinions on how 5G should roll out. He might even be willing to override local regulations to make it happen.
Yeah, that's right. He's all about getting 5G up and running as fast as possible, removing any obstacles, even if it means pushing back against local rules. He thinks the federal government should step in, take charge, basically clear the way for this 5G infrastructure.
So what does that look like in reality? Are we talking about the FCC telling towns and cities they can't have a say in where these cell towers go up, even if they've got concerns about, potential health risks or environmental impact?
It's definitely a possibility. Carr's stance suggests that getting 5G everywhere quickly is his top priority, even if it means less local control, less say for the communities themselves.
So we could end up with faster internet, but maybe at the cost of less control over what our neighborhoods look like.
True.
Trade-offs, huh?
Exactly. It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And while faster speeds are definitely tempting, it's important to think about those downsides.
Yeah.
And make sure communities still have a voice in how all this technology is rolled out.
That's a good point. It's about finding the right balance. But before we get too deep into 5G, let's switch gears a bit and talk about media ownership.
Okay, yeah.
It's another area where the FCC plays a big role.
Huge role, yeah. The rules about who can own how much of the media, that's crucial for making sure we have diverse viewpoints and a healthy marketplace of ideas. But with the explosion of digital platforms and all these streaming services, The lines between traditional media outlets are getting blurry.
Right, it's not as simple as it used to be.
Not at all. And a lot of people are saying the old rules just don't fit anymore.
And Carr seems to be one of the people who thinks the current rules are too strict.
Exactly. He's not convinced that we need all these limits on media ownership anymore. He sees the internet as this vast, decentralized media landscape.
Right, a lot more diverse than traditional media.
Way more diverse. He thinks these old rules are just holding back innovation, preventing media companies from adapting to this new digital world.
So what's the potential downside here? Could we end up with a few giant corporations controlling most of the information we see? And how would that affect the diversity of opinions and viewpoints we're exposed to?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? To understand what's at stake here, we need to dig into the whole history and reasoning behind these media ownership regulations. Why were they put in place in the first place?
Okay, yeah.
Well, the idea was to prevent any one company from having too much power over the flow of information, to make sure we have a variety of voices in the public square.
It's interesting to think about how those rules, which were created way back when, apply to the media landscape we have today.
Yeah.
And with Carr pushing for deregulation, it seems like we could be in for a major shakeup in how we get our news and information.
Oh, definitely. And the potential consequences of loosening those media ownership rules, that's something we need to look at very carefully.
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
It is. Some people argue that letting companies merge and consolidate, it could actually make things more efficient.
Okay.
Economies of scale, maybe leading to lower prices, more choices for consumers. But then there's the flip side, the risk of less competition, fewer viewpoints being represented,
Right.
and the possibility of these giant media conglomerates having way too much influence over what people think and believe.
A tough one, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No easy answers. But we got to understand what these policy changes could mean, especially for how we access information and the overall health of our democracy. We've got a lot to unpack here, so it's like we're at this fork in the road, right? On one side, you've got the potential for media companies to get bigger, more consolidated, maybe even a few big players controlling most of what we see. On the other side, there's this idea that the internet's already changed the game. It's more diverse, more decentralized. So do these old rules even make sense anymore? How do we deal with all this and still make sure we have a healthy media landscape, with a good mix of ideas and viewpoints?
It's a tough question. It's something policymakers all over the world are trying to figure out. One approach is to really focus on media literacy, helping people develop those critical thinking skills. The more we're aware of what we're consuming, the more we can spot bias or manipulation no matter who owns the platform.
That makes sense. It's not just about who's in control, but about how we, the audience, engage with the information.
Right.
But let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about net neutrality, 5G, and this whole media ownership thing. What are the big takeaways here? What should people really keep in mind as they're trying to understand this whole complex situation?
Well, one thing that's clear is that the FCC has a ton of power.
Yeah.
They're making decisions that affect how we use the internet every day, how we get information, how we talk to each other, even how we do business online. And with the Trump administration pushing for less regulation, it seems like we're moving toward a more hands-off approach to the internet.
So we've got to stay informed. This isn't just about some abstract policy debate. It's about how we experience the internet, in our daily lives.
Absolutely. You need to understand how these changes could affect you personally, whether it's your internet speed, how much you pay for streaming, or even what kinds of viewpoints you're exposed to online. And it's just as important to make your voice heard. Talk to your elected officials, support groups that are fighting for the kind of internet you want to see, even just having conversations with friends and family. That can make a difference too.
Yeah, that's true. Knowledge is power, right? And in this digital age, understanding how the internet's regulated, that's key to navigating the online world. But let's not get too pessimistic here. While there are definitely risks with deregulation, there might be some opportunities too.
That's a good point. Some people argue that less regulation could actually lead to more innovation, more competition,
Okay.
maybe even lower prices and better services for everyone. And without all the red tape, we could see new technologies like 5G roll out much faster, which could open up a lot of new possibilities, both economically and socially.
So it's not a clear-cut good or bad situation. There are valid arguments on both sides.
Exactly.
And we need to weigh those risks and benefits carefully as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely. As we navigate this uncertain future, it's important to remember that nothing's set in stone.
Hmm.
The choices we make today will shape the internet for years to come, and those choices will be influenced by the people who show up, who speak out, who demand a better future.
That's an encouraging thought. We're not just passive bystanders here. We can actually shape the digital world we want to live in. But realistically, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this. It's complex stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who's feeling lost, like they don't even know where to begin?
I'd say don't be afraid to ask questions. Talk to experts, read articles, listen to podcasts like this one. And most importantly, don't just accept what you hear from people in authority. Question things, be curious, be willing to learn and change your mind.
That's great advice, all about staying curious and really digging into these issues. But speaking of digging deep, we've covered a lot of ground today, from net neutrality to media ownership to the whole idea of deregulation. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier. How are these changes going to affect the average person using the internet?
Yeah, we need to keep in mind that these aren't just theoretical discussions happening somewhere far away.
Right.
These decisions have a real impact on how people access information, how they communicate, how they live their lives online.
So can you give us some concrete examples? How could these changes at the FCC actually play out in someone's daily life?
Okay, so imagine you're a student who needs the internet for schoolwork, research, homework, online classes. If net neutrality goes away, your internet provider could slow down access to those educational websites or streaming services,
Oh, wow.
making it harder to get your work done or participate in class.
That's a serious problem.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone needs access to education, and the internet's become such a vital tool for that.
It is.
But it's not just about education, right? What about people who work from home or rely on the internet to stay connected with family and friends who live far away?
Absolutely. If you're working remotely and your internet provider starts prioritizing certain types of traffic, it could totally disrupt your workflow. Or if you're using video chat to keep in touch with loved ones overseas, a slower connection could make it really hard to have a decent conversation.
It's amazing how much we depend on the internet for so many things now. And if internet providers have more control, it could really affect our ability to do all that, to get information, to communicate effectively, be a part of the online world.
Yeah, it's something to think about. And it's worth noting that these changes might not affect everyone equally.
Oh,
Some communities, especially those in rural areas or with lower incomes, they might be hit harder by a less regulated internet. They might face higher prices, fewer choices for providers, or slower speeds that make it almost impossible to use essential online services.
That's an important point. Digital equity is crucial. Everyone should have access to affordable, reliable internet service, no matter where they live or how much money they make. But it's not just about access, is it? It's about who's in control. Who gets to decide what we can see online, how much we pay for it, how our data is used? These are all questions at the heart of this whole debate about FCC regulation.
Exactly. And as we move forward, we need to have a really thoughtful conversation about all this. One that takes into account everyone's perspectives. Consumers, businesses, policymakers, advocates, everyone. The internet's a powerful tool, and its future depends on the choices we make today.
It can feel kind of daunting, right? All these potential changes, so much to think about. But we've also talked about some hopeful stuff. The future's not fixed. We can still make a difference.
Absolutely. The decisions made at the FCC, they're going to ripple out and touch everything in the digital world. And the people who speak up, the people who advocate for what they believe in, they're the ones who'll shape those decisions.
So what can our listeners actually do? How can they make their voices heard? Be a part of this conversation about the future of the internet?
Well, first things first, stay informed. Follow the news, read articles from trustworthy sources, listen to podcasts like this one. The more you understand the issues, the better.
Like we always say, knowledge is power. But it's not enough to just know about it, right? We have to actually do something.
Exactly. Get in touch with your elected officials. Let them know where you stand on these issues. Support organizations that are fighting for the kind of internet you want to see. And don't underestimate the power of just talking about it with your friends, family, colleagues. The more we have these open, informed conversations, the better prepared we'll be to face the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that come with the digital age.
It's about raising awareness, making this a shared responsibility, We're all in this together. But let's be real. Not everyone can become a policy wonk. It's a lot to take on. What would you say to someone who's feeling overwhelmed, not sure where to even start?
Start small. Pick one issue that really matters to you, something you're passionate about, and dig into it. Find an organization that's working on that issue and see how you can contribute. Maybe it's volunteering your time, donating, or even just spreading the word.
Find your way in, make a difference however you can. And remember, you're not alone.
Mm.
There are so many people, so many organizations out there fighting for a fairer, more equitable digital world.
That's right. And when we join forces, when we work together, we can build a powerful movement for change. The internet has this incredible potential to connect us, empower us, create a more just and equitable world. But it's up to us to make that happen.
That's a great note to end on. The future of the internet is in our hands. It's up to each of us to stay informed, to get involved, and to demand a digital world that works for everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into the FCC and what these potential changes could mean for the internet. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even inspiring.
It was great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.